Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and everybody else. Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie, and we are very happy to be joined today for the first time. A new guest. That in itself is an event for the show because we've had like the same 4 people on 8 times each. We are joined by the Fight Site's Lukasz Fenrych.
Fenrych. Just go with
Fenrych. Okay. All right. Okay. Jesus Christ.
That's the English way for the English people to understand.
Give me the Polish pronunciation.
Fenrych.
Sounds very German, actually.
It is. It's a German surname.
Oh, it's a German.
The embarrassing family history we were German 600 years ago.
Oh God. I was German more recently than that, probably. So I guess I can't judge. Welcome, Lukasz, to the show. We are very happy to have you. We were, of course, supposed to have a different British invasion on Heavy Hands. Kyle McLaughlin promised to join us and then was a coward and had to withdraw. He decided that, in fact, Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence was too good for him. He might cry if he tried to talk about it, like Luke Thomas did. I'm not making fun of Luke for that. I actually thought it was quite nice.
It was like I did make fun of him, but it was quite sweet.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That's a fair way to sort of split the difference there. But Lukasz is here as the Fight Site's resident boxing expert and all-around fun guy to interact with online to help us talk about one of the most amazing boxing performances I have ever seen. Maybe the most amazing boxing performance of the modern era, however you choose to define that. Certainly a career-defining and in some ways era-defining fight between Terence Crawford and Errol Spence. But there was also a big UFC pay-per-view last weekend, and Phil and I have successfully bullied Lukasz into helping us break that one down too. That's Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje 2. Some other stuff happened. I don't know. We're going to do the UFC first, and then we're going to get into the boxing. I think we're all more excited to get into the boxing, but knowing our fans who are depraved and cloistered and cooped up in their pathetic little sport of MMA, we're going to cover UFC 291 first. Anyway, Lukasz, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I would like to point out that I also write for Bloody Elbow, because if I don't point that out...
Of course. Jesus, and you just published your article for Bloody Elbow. Why did I not plug the site that I also work for?
Yeah, exactly.
Shit.
I was like, there might be some questions there.
Let's start over. Anyway, Lukasz, thank you for joining us. Phil?
Thank you for having me.
Phil didn't say anything when I introduced him. I can't tell if that's the bit.
You ran through the intro so fast there was no room for me to get a word in edgeways.
I'm excited. Edgeways. God, I hate that. Edgewise.
Whatever.
Edgewise.
No,
Edgeways.
I refuse.
There's two Englishmen here. You're overruled.
I don't know why we say...
He was already grousing about this as soon as Lucas joined as well, for anyone listening. I think he also feels particularly threatened because Lukasz is not as earthy as Kyle.
That's right, not as earthy. Yeah.
Yeah. No, apparently I sound posh, which is news to me, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to note that Kyle himself was betrayed when he first heard me because he thought I'd be Polish, and
I mean,
when I came on with this accent, he was like, "You're more British than me."
Yeah. Yeah. Kyle is, in his own way, the quintessential Englishman, to be fair. He's like that, do you remember that video of that weird little misshapen troll guy who was running around like his, council estate patio, clanging a pot and going, "All right, Boris, let's clap for Boris." Do you remember that?
I don't remember that.
That's Kyle, I think, in a nutshell, is that kind of guy.
I think if you accuse Kyle of clapping for Boris, he might actually fly to the States and hurt you.
He's not here. He didn't turn up. I think it's time for us to... we might as well just say that he's obviously a big Boris Johnson.
It's time to expose his true feelings, live and on air.
I mean, you're the one who lives closer to him, Phil. So if you want to take that risk onto yourself, that's that.
All of this does really tell you what kind of Englishman Kyle is. Careful what you say. The streets have ears, and Kyle is out there. Anyway, UFC 291, fellas. Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier 2. Phil, you've done the least amount of talking. Why don't you get close to that microphone and tell me what you thought about it?
So this was very much the savvier performance of the two. You know, this was the two men both having grown up, I think.
I agree.
Much slower paced and more cautious than the first fight, whilst actually obviously ending faster and in a more sort of immediately violent way. Mostly I thought it was a really good performance from Justin Gaethje. Mm-hmm. Having watched it a few times now, I think I was thinking he did better in the first round than I probably have on subsequent watches. Mm-hmm. But in general, I was just like, "Oh, this is really working." And yeah, I guess I didn't really give enough credence to the sort of Zane Simon theory that you also espouse, that Dustin Poirier is a better back foot counterpuncher than he is a come forward fighter, and we've also talked about that in sort of the Conor McGregor in the run to the Conor McGregor fight. But I was like, that's probably still the case, but I still don't really trust Justin Gaethje to be defensive against Dustin Poirier.
Yeah.
And whilst he did have some hairy moments, it actually proved to be I think, much more stable strategy for him.
Yeah, I agree. And I also thought, watching it live, and this has held up in subsequent viewings, that Gaethje won the first round. I think everyone probably scored it that way. But that... I
think it's harder to tell. I mean, he gets pretty rocked a couple of times.
Yeah, and I think there's a definite momentum shift happening in that round towards Dustin Poirier. Especially in the last 2 minutes, last minute and a half, Dustin starts landing some really, really clean shots. There's that one extremely clean straight left shortly after the 2 minute mark, and a couple more like that. I think he spent that early time sort of getting a read on Justin Gaethje's defenses, which are, a little more the first layer than they were in previous fights, but still just more or less as straightforward for a puncher, a smart combination puncher like Poirier to exploit. Mm-hmm. And but yeah, he definitely got tagged up trying to come forward and having to make all of the exchanges happen of his own accord. But he was getting there. And then this was one of those where I agree. I mean, it was such a high-quality fight compared to the last one. Both guys, I think, looking fast and technical by their standards, and both guys really putting their defense out there. And it was one where I was, actually disappointed when it ended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Because it was going to get super interesting, and it was already really fascinating to watch, and then it was just over.
Yeah, I mean, it had potential to be even better than their first one.
I agree. Yeah,
because it had more of that chance to be a simmer. I think one of those things across that first round is that you could see sort of the dynamic between them in terms of their sort of their demeanor, because when things were going wrong for Poirier on the offensive, you could see him being sort of completely unflustered.
Yes.
By, when things went wrong. When Gaethje started getting tagged up, you could see him starting to go back to Gaethje classic.
Agreed.
Starting to do the big roll at the waist, the huge overhand right. You could see him kind of getting excited and getting into it, and sort of to his own detriment in that way. Mm-hmm. I think the second round second round came around, and in the same way that I think Rose Namajunas has done that under Trevor Whitman's tutelage,
Yeah.
Gaethje had calmed himself back down and was once again being harder to close down, being responsible, throwing straight punches to intercept Poirier on the way in, throwing the outside low kick rather than trying to step into a huge inside low kick. And so you could see this potentially fascinating dynamic playing out where Poirier is sort of more consistent mentally, but has to push himself into a situation where he's not necessarily at his strongest. Gaethje is probably going to be changing the tide of how the fight goes in a more physical sense because he's building up attritional damage. And he's not... Most of his leg kicks are not getting countered in the same way they were in the previous fight.
Yeah.
It had all the hallmarks of just building up into this incredible fight, but then Gaethje booted him in the head.
Yeah. Lukasz, I didn't see your pre-fight comments about this one, if there were any, online. What did you expect?
There weren't really. No, I'll be honest, I didn't know what I was expecting, except for, a firefight. I was hoping for the MMA version of Ward Gaethje, because as a boxing fan, that's always what I hope for from wild fights. But I think what I was hoping for, if I thought about sort of technically, is that I was hoping that Justin Gaethje would remember that he's good at things, because he sometimes forgets. And it kind of goes to what Phil was saying, where he started off remembering that he knows how to... He isn't the best defender in the world, but he knows how to manage range. And I was hoping for that, and we got that some of the time. So and then that would make Poirier have to push the pace and give us some new interesting things. And I guess I wasn't hoping for Ward Gaethje because I was hoping they wouldn't just be smashing each other in the face in a really dumb way. So
that's kind of what I was expecting. I had just watched the rest of Crawford Spence, and I was like, wow, I just witnessed art. Now I'm going to go watch something stupid. It felt like I've just finished Casablanca, and now I'm going to go and watch Fast X, right? And it was actually, it actually exceeded my expectations. It was, as Phil said, it had all the makings of a simmer that was guaranteed to boil over at some point.
Yeah. Although I will say, I don't know, am I allowed to skip to the end? There was a I don't want to call Dustin Poirier dumb, but
don't.
But if a guy's throwing a head kick, if a guy throws one head kick at you and you catch it with your guard, you're supposed to be able to do that, right? But if a guy's throwing 6 head kicks at you around and you catch all of them on your arm, you probably need a game plan to deal with that, because at some point it's going to blast through your guard, right? So I'm blaming Dustin Poirier basically for your disappointment in the fight not going longer.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of MMA fighters don't think that eventually one is going to blast through their guard. Dustin Poirier has never been head kick KO'd before, or even hurt really by a blocked head kick that I can recall.
That's probably true, but it's just it's too much trust in your own forearm.
Certainly, yeah. At the very least, you should be double blocking, right? If you're going to be blocking with your arms at all.
Yeah, and if you know your opponents do, because Gaethje's thrown them in your head, so he's seen something. It's not something Gaethje, I think, really does. You should persuade him to stop. If you're catching his arm, catching him anyway, you might as well just do something after that to persuade him that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Poirier was just like, no, I'm going to let you head kick me.
Yeah. I suspect he was, as basically everyone else was, I suspect he was surprised by the fact that Gaethje threw, I think, 3 high kicks in this fight.
Yeah.
Although maybe Dustin Poirier was watching the same version of the fight as Joe Rogan, who said immediately after the knockout, I think that was the first high kick Justin threw.
Joe Rogan don't analyze good.
Joe Rogan was in particularly bad form for this card, I have to say. There was also, this is a huge digression, but there was the thing earlier with Darius Flowers, I think is the guy's name, getting just absolutely nailed in both the gut and the cock. And he made the absurd argument that because the foot hit the stomach first, it was a legal strike, which is not how fouls work at all.
No. Yeah.
Like if I punch you with a closed fist, that doesn't give me a free pass to then have my thumb insert itself into your eye socket. That's not how it works.
Yeah, was it? I've always said I've thought for years that Joe Rogan hasn't watched any MMA apart from the fights he commentates on.
Absolutely.
For about 10 years, but like nowadays I start to suspect that he isn't watching the fights he's commentating on either.
Yeah, he's just podcasting with DC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. I will say, so it was another win for rear hand kick. The technique of like I guess the last 2 years or so, and it was interesting. I was listening to Jack Slack's podcast. He was saying that one of the reasons he thinks it's having such a renaissance in MMA at the moment is basically because people have gotten better at MMA, better at boxing, and so they are more likely to try and slip and parry right punches that they might have before have just been ignoring.
Sure, that makes sense.
So that they are being set up for the, and it is notable that this is something which has worked nicely on guys like Robbie Lawler or Dustin Poirier, who are known for having quite good boxing defense. And I thought that was cool, especially because it comes back to the classic. The classic forum arguments of Sherdog of yesteryear, which is that MMA fighters shouldn't use head movement because they'll just get head kicked.
Yeah,
Cody Garbrandt says you're
right all along.
Cody Garbrandt proved that years ago.
It's true. Yeah, it is such a it was another really funny commentary thing is that they were so dazzled by that. Like, it's exactly what Leon Edwards did to Kamaru Usman. It's like that is like it was awesome, but it's such a staple kickboxing technique. You like it literally a lot of times it's not even done. This was, I think, clearly done intentionally. A lot of times it's just baked into the way people throw their high kicks. Like that lead arm comes out for the torque anyway. It's a pretty simple thing to kind of get yourself to have that look more like a punch threat. A lot of times people don't even. Kickboxers don't even throw a punch or throw away a punch with the lead hand. They just stick that hand in the other person's face because it matters less that they think it's a punch and more that they can't see the high kick. So awesome move. I mean, I think a very good sign for Justin Gaethje. As you characterized him last week, Phil, the man who. Is really defined by his tendency to fall over when he misses a punch. To throw a sort of like 2-sequence idea where clearly he knew what he was setting up when he started the big movement. It was not just a big stupid explosion. It was nice. We saw the jab in his last fight. Not a lot of jabs here, interestingly. I wonder if when we got to round 3, he would have suddenly, once again, remembered that he has a lead hand. That isn't just a hook?
No, it's an MMA fighter it's an MMA fighter
Southpaw.
in an open stance fight. No, there's no way.
Yeah.
He never would have dropped. No matter what had happened, wouldn't matter if he'd eaten an encyclopedia of boxing beforehand. He's never. I was 100% confident he wouldn't be jabbing Justin Gaethje.
That is how Justin Gaethje would absorb boxing knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah.
I heard that.
The thing for me with Justin Gaethje is my feeling is he's good at loads of shit, but he can only be good at like 2 things in any given fight. So if he wasn't jabbing at the start, he wasn't going to be jabbing at the end. that wasn't one of his chosen skills. He's he has a loadout.
Very tactical thinker, shall we say? Really gets fixated on the 1 or 2 things that are currently being put in front of him.
I mean, I think it's less a tactical thinker than like Lukasz kind of said. It's literally loaded into him at the start of the fight by Trevor Whitman, and
at the start of each round,
it probably slowly drifts away over time.
So it's less tactical thinking, more lack of object permanence.
Yeah.
Well, there you
Yeah,
go.
I think, like Rose Namajunas, he's been trained to stick to game plans and approaches for what is now approaching round-winning amounts of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And yeah, I don't know if I'm totally jazzed at the idea of him fighting Islam Makhachev.
yeah. Who cares?
He spent. I still just think he's going to panic in ground situations. I don't think that's changed, and he spent so much of this fight with his back to the fence.
Yeah.
That I'm just maybe they can find some way of replicating the Khabib "don't put your back to the fence" game plan, which was again something which he actually did a reasonably good job sticking to. But yeah, I'm not super compelled by it. But this was amazing. This was him turning what really looked like a troublesome style matchup in the first fight into something which was it was a KO win, but it was also just even in the exchanges itself, it looked like it was even if he might not have won it if it had gone all five, he was giving himself the best chance that he could have done.
Yeah, and I was really pleased with how Dustin looked as well. He was. He looked fast and sharp, and heck, he was figuring things out as it went along. And I thought both guys looked great, which is why, frankly, the only thing I would get really jazzed for is the immediate prospect of a rubber match. I would love to see these guys fight again. I want to see more of what we just saw. I thought it was great.
Yeah,
that would be a logical matchmaking decision, and the UFC doesn't do that anymore. So
yeah, well, who knows if he's going to fight Islam? Then I don't know. Maybe it could be interesting. The mere prospect of it going to the ground and knowing how badly he has flamed out there is stupid. On the other hand, I don't know that Islam is capable of doing what Khabib did, which is essentially playing a game of progressive bets on who can be the most stupidly aggressive.
Yeah, he just played chicken with him.
Yeah, so because Justin is always going to one-up you. He's going to three-up you at a certain point in stupid decision-making and beat himself if you're as tough and insane and aggressive as Khabib was in that fight. So who knows?
I'm also presupposing that Islam beats Charles.
Yes, that is true.
Be a rematch.
That is true.
Between Gaethje and Oliveira, which I think is probably more winnable for him.
I'd be much more interested, frankly, in seeing Gaethje and Oliveira fight again. Because that was stupid in a good way. All right, then. Well, let's take a break and get to what I think is, and I hope our audience will agree, the real meat of the weekend. I'm going to ask something of the audience right now, in fact, before I go to the break. If you have not watched Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence, go watch it now, right? Try to absorb maybe so you can appreciate it a little bit of what was going on in the ether beforehand. The whole, re-listen to last week's episode. The whole, this is 50-50, this is a big test type of feeling. And then go watch it so you can be as amazed by it as I'm quite sure all three of us were. I'll let you know right now that currently on YouTube you can find a wonderful video with somebody with an incredibly steady hand shot the entire fight from their seat in the stands, which is kind of my favorite angle to see boxing matches from anyway. And you can see every single exchange that happens in the fight. Go watch it and then come back because we are going to have a good time talking about one of the most impressive things I've ever seen done in a boxing ring after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are now talking about the boxing. Terence Crawford, Errol Spence, two undefeated fighters, two fighters presumably at the top of their games. I knew the moment that this happened, that the retconning would be swift in coming. And I'm not saying that there is no reason to retcon some of the pre-fight thoughts about this matchup. That always happens, right? Most matchups are a combination of one person looking worse than you expected. Most master classes, I should say, are a combination of one fighter looking worse than you expected and one looking better than you expected. Always there's some room to reevaluate your preconceived notions after the fact. But I wanted to hold on to the feeling I had when I first saw this for just a little longer, which was, oh my God, I did not expect this, and this was incredible. Lukasz, what did you expect of this style matchup going in? And please tell me you were also excited when it played out the way it did.
I was kind of flabbergasted because also not irritated, but it's like I'm not the only one, but I predicted quite a lot of the ways that, the reasons Crawford was going to win were the things that happened, but I was not expecting him to do it that quickly and that sharply and that, just immediately. We're all going, oh yeah, Terence Crawford needs 6 rounds to figure Errol Spence out, and it's just like 3 minutes and we're done here.
Yeah,
and the rest of it was just not a formality. It was incredible, but it was
methodical building on what he'd already established. I mean, it just got worse and worse and worse for Errol Spence, but it started way faster than I think anyone expected.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first round was pretty much what we all thought was going to happen, right? It was, we all scored it for Spence just because he threw more jabs. And the second round was Crawford showing Spence that he can't rely on his backing out to be safe.
Yeah.
And Spence freaked the fuck out. Sorry.
Please swear all you like.
He didn't know how to deal with that. Like, that was for me. What you've been saying, there's been some retconning going on, and but for me, Spence looked fine through the first round and a half, and then when he got knocked down because he was trying to get away, and he was like, I can't do this. He came in with a jab, and then he tried to back out because he knew there'd be a counter, and Crawford just followed him, and Crawford was comfortable doing that because he knew he wasn't gonna, Spence isn't a counter puncher. Spence, he knocked him down like with an off balance shot, and Spence just freaked the fuck out and didn't know what to do with himself after that, really.
This is something that both Schwan Humes and I think Kyle McLaughlin have said beforehand, a very correct read, which is characterizing Errol Spence as a fighter who really needs to build momentum and establish himself early to feel comfortable in a fight. And we have seen in past fights from him that he has taken a while. I mean, these are ones where he's survived. No one has ever done anything like this to him. But like in his fight with Kell Brook, he was not comfortable through much of that fight. Yeah. And there was a clear difference there between that and some of the other performances where he just he establishes some momentum early and then it's just like an avalanche building for the rest of the bout. Yeah. That's what I really didn't expect, and I think it is a huge credit to Terence Crawford and his team that they appeared to recognize that and seems to think we're going to spend one round getting reads, and then we are going to immediately start punishing and pushing him out of the fight. And that knockdown showed that Terence Crawford often has this feeling out phase where he's kind of figuring out what he wants to do. He just condensed the whole process into one round because everything that happens in that second round, including the knockdown, is built on what happened initially. The particular entry that Errol Spence did, I think he does like this dipping jab trying to come up into an overhand left. Not only did Crawford spend time figuring out what that dipping jab usually set up and how to avoid it, shortly before the knockdown, he tried to counter it. Left hand over the top to set up a right hook, and the right hook fell short as Errol Spence was stepping out. Maybe 20, 30 seconds later, Spence comes in with the same setup, left straight to set up a right straight as he's backing up, and that knocks Errol Spence down.
Yeah, and I think I'd point out as well is Spence, because Spence isn't a dumb fighter by any means, and he knew that the initial counter was coming. Like he didn't aim to throw the follow up to the jab In that particular instance, he knew the count was coming and he stepped back out. But Crawford was like, okay, I know you're going to do that.
Yep.
I understand that you've read my read and I'm going to punish you. You can't play chess with me.
Two steps ahead.
It's just not happening. It's not happening for you.
Yeah, 2 steps ahead. That is the amazing thing about Crawford, is the ability to keep all of these shifting tactical complexities in mind in the middle of a heated exchange while being completely... I don't think it's a facade that Crawford looks so calm. I mean, at one point in this fight, they were like, Errol Spence is in the corner and his coaches are like, you got to relax. And then the camera, whether by design or not, immediately cuts to Bud Crawford looking like he's basically just taken a nap in the corner. I don't think that's a veneer. He is incredibly relaxed and focused at every single point in his fights.
You say focused. He spent quite a few times between the rounds. He was shouting at Jamal Charlo in between rounds.
I think that's how easy it is to lock in his focus to what's happening in the fight, though. He can distract himself and do he can multitask because he is just subconsciously linked in to all the information he's gathering and building on in the fight.
Yeah, he is.
It doesn't take a conscious effort for him to be focused. That's just the kind of fighter he is.
Yeah, he is incredibly. Just people love to talk about Lomachenko having this computer downloading thing going on, and that was even back when people were talking about it with Lomachenko. It was jumping on people having talked about it with Crawford because he's always done it. And it was just jumping on that, and just Crawford is that guy in a way that no one else is in boxing at the moment.
Yeah. But as you said, I mean, the really impressive thing was how quickly Crawford established the momentum, the direction of this fight, because he has started. I mean, when this was happening, I was thinking of his fight with Hank Lundy, who I think on Twitter I called Hank Bundy, which was a fun mix-up. That was one where he started super hot, like first round. Basically a slugfest, but that was like an emotional decision, I think, because Lundy had gotten in his face and tried to punk him at the weigh-in, and he didn't like Lundy, and he wanted to prove to Lundy that he could stand toe-to-toe with him and it was no problem. And in fact, he successfully tired Lundy out quite early in that fight. I think he knocked him out by the 5th or 6th round. I had never seen Crawford. Is there any previous fight where he has made such an obviously calculated decision to step on the gas as early as round 2? I don't think I've seen it before.
Yeah, I don't think so. Not like not in any of the really big ones. Who was he fighting? I mean, he beat a couple of the record now, which I should have had up already, and I did, and then I closed it because I'm clever.
God.
Kell Brook he obviously beat quite quickly, but that was just Kell Brook kind of falling apart because he has no resistance anymore. I think Indongo was the last one, and that was again Indongo. He kind of took a round to figure out that Indongo isn't actually very good, and then he went, "Okay, I don't need to be here."
Yeah, and the Brook fight was very different. The Brook fight, he actually I think kind of struggled to get going. Like Brook actually sort of had Crawford's timing with his jab a lot through the first 2.5, 3 rounds.
Yeah,
and Crawford,
I'm not going to go on an extended detour, but the thing with Kell Brook, and this fight kind of puts into perspective, Kell Brook's natural timing is incredible.
Yeah,
and it's just a shame that he never bothered to build any layers behind that because he would have been, really good. But
guy with incredible timing and a great jab, who was a really ugly punch and clutch guy for many of the fights I've seen him in.
Yeah, but he got his win over Amir Khan, so
Yeah, well, who hasn't? So yeah, Phil. I mean, what did you make of this performance?
Yeah, I mean, it's just remarkable stuff. It's just great that we have boxing now has essentially like great fighters up and down like the weight class spectrum.
Yeah.
It has incredible talents to be excited by. And sorry, Lukasz,
I was just going to say, it's great that the promoters are actually showing us these fighters, because these guys have existed, but we didn't see them on the telly, and now they're being given to us. Obviously Crawford would always have been on the telly, but you know what I'm saying. No way would not. 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, he's famously the least promotable of the current pound for pound crop.
Yeah. The nightmare for a boxing or MMA promoter, a fighter who is simply very, very good.
Yeah.
What do we do? How do we sell this?
And...
This guy's a genius. What do we do?
Yeah.
But
go on, Phil.
It does make you think, how much of a personality did Floyd Mayweather really have? He was just like, oh, I like money.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much it. And it was largely manufactured. And, he wasn't... And he was often, quite pedestrian to watch. It's the fact that Crawford is having approximately similar fights where he downloads his opponent and so on. But it's the fact that he's also then just wiping them out.
He obliterates them after he's processed all that information. Yeah. I mean, what is his knockout? What is his knockout rate? Is it 30 of 40 wins? I think his knockouts.
Something like that.
He's a very high finishing 31,
77%.
Very high finish percentage for such an obviously calculating fighter.
Yeah, it's because he's a complete bastard. Is why.
Yeah.
I retweeted one of my favorite old articles from Hamilton Nolan, who used to write at Deadspin, who wrote some great pieces on how Bud Crawford is this complete fighter, and also I think he wrote one called Bud Crawford is the humiliator.
Yes.
But yeah, in terms of the actual fight itself, I mean, I think, looking back on us talking on it last week, a lot of what we were subconsciously expecting was for Spence to dictate with his jab, which sort of started happening, and then for Crawford to start dialing in on the follow-ups. We were talking about he's going to be landing counter uppercuts to the level changes and so on. That Crawford would be sort of blocking and getting around the jabs, and then would counter Spence once they were in exchanges and they were in the pocket. And that was true. Lots of that happened. He did land the a peach of an uppercut, which Conor was specifically saying he was going to do. But I think what surprised me, and again, I'm not as familiar with his game as I think especially Lukasz is, but I really didn't expect him to start out-jabbing Spence so quickly.
Yeah.
He took away the lead hand the first part of the exchange almost immediately. I mean, as you said, it was basically starting to go. He was starting to do it. He started off just parrying and blocking Spence's jabs mostly in the first round, and then just started to out-jab him in the second. And yeah, that just really seemed like the end of it. He was just like, I'm always slightly out-positioning you.
Yep.
I'm much more prepared to block your jabs than you are mine. And he just dictated and was piling up damage. I mean, he hurt Spence with at least one jab in, I think, round 4. He looked quite buzzed by it.
He also, shortly before the finish, he rocked him with a jab. And then probably my favorite moment in the entire fight, because I'm glad you highlighted it, Phil. To me, there were all these highlight shots, all these beautiful right hooks, the incredible right uppercut, which is so fast that I did not know what happened until I saw the replay. Mm-hmm. I thought it was
he just stumbles away from the ropes.
Yeah, you see Spence sort of hitting Crawford, which in reality happens a split second after he's already been hit with the uppercut, and then live from the farther angle, all I saw was the right hook after. That as Spence was already going down. Those were, these amazing highlight shots, but it was Crawford's jab that completely crushed Spence. And I think it goes back to what Lukasz was saying at the top, that a huge part of this fight was
not merely the Crawford's ability to counter Spence, but his ability to punish Spence's attempts to get out after an exchange. It was sort of like a very, very sophisticated, classy version of the dynamic between like Donald Cerrone and Alexander Hernandez, where he would just like run forward blitzing and Hernandez didn't know what to do as he was getting out. This was in single moments. Spence would take one good step back out, and Crawford knew exactly when that step was coming, how far he was going to be moving, and frequently it was the jab that punished his attempts to reset. And my favorite moment in the whole fight is during the knockout sequence. Spence is, obviously at this point, he's completely desperate. I mean, I think he broke his orbital, his face is all swollen, he's broken. I mean, and I don't fault him for that. He throws this flailing left hand, easily defended. Crawford counters with the beautiful right hook. But then immediately after, he might be able to recover. I mean, he's hurt. Who knows? But he takes a step back, not even thinking, because he's just been hit and rocked. And immediately, Crawford drives off the back foot and comes in with this beautiful jab that made me think of Marvin Hagler. Like a rocket right jab that completely destroyed any hopes Errol Spence might have had of recovering his balance or getting any initiative in the fight ever again or surviving the sequence, which indeed he did not. This immediate willingness to follow up. Oh, he stepped back, but I'm still lined up to go. Bam, cracked him with a jab, snapped his head back while he was already rocked. And that to me is what really set up the whole rest of the finishing sequence. Spence was never going to recover after that, and it was the jab.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was just essentially sealed both ends of the exchanges.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have expected Spence to have more of a chance in initiating them. But once it became obvious that he couldn't because he was getting out jabbed the entire time, there was nowhere to go. He was losing the beginning and the end of the exchanges almost all of the time.
Yep.
So that's the thing for me is Spence isn't necessarily a fighter who has to land his jab to work off it. Like we've seen fighters, they have to connect to do their follow-up work. Spence isn't that guy. Like he's happy to work off his jab as long as the opponent reacts to it. But Crawford was just like, he wasn't bothered, and every time he did try to follow up, he just got jabbed in the face, and because he was stepping in, that's what was fucking him up. And then he just that took away a lot of his options.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I was just completely blown away. I mean, it was, and Dan, who we had on last week, I mean, he's talked about how this is basically the pinnacle of what has always been my favorite style matchup in boxing. In other combat sports as well, but especially in boxing, is pressure fighter versus counterpuncher.
Yeah.
But it was so one-sided that there were long stretches of this fight where that was not the dynamic. Where Crawford was literally just boxing Errol Spence out and pushing him up against the ropes, using that jab to just make it, impossible for him to get in and impossible to get back out safely after he had made all this effort to get in. That, I think, if Spence didn't already know it was over, when in like round 3 or 4, Crawford just spent a minute or two at a time just relentlessly pressuring him with the jab, he knew it was over then. I mean, this is not how an Errol Spence fight is supposed to go.
Make this observation, but I think it was... Yeah. I think quite a few people noted this, is Spence seemed to get smaller as the fight went on. Like,
right.
He's obviously the bigger guy physically, but he just lost all his confidence, and it just seemed like he visibly seemed smaller, which obviously is not true, but he's just getting so outmuscled in every phase. It was just like the belief went out of him. It was he never stopped trying, like he never gave up, but which is why he got knocked out. But he knew he wasn't going to win. Like after 3 rounds, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. I think Dan also mentioned last week the infighting and how that might play into it, because Crawford has been a fighter who is often seems perfectly happy to just sort of take a moment to breathe in a clinch and wait for the referee to separate. And Spence has often been a much more insistent inside fighter who is fighting for like inside grips.
fighting to control his opponent's hands, fighting for head position, fighting to get the lower position and gain some leverage, get his head under his opponent's chin. And I did wonder. I mean, I thought it was an interesting thing to think about, but I think I also mentioned that something similar happened in Haney-Lomachenko, where Haney had also been a way more than Crawford, a punch and clutch kind of fighter, who didn't need really to flex any positional infighting kind of moves because everybody would just sort of like fall in with their head down and he could just wrap them up. And then against Lomachenko, he was in there against somebody who literally does know how to wrestle in a boxing context. And it turns out that Haney was pretty good at navigating the infighting, and that there is a little more depth there. I thought the same thing kind of happened here, because there was nowhere safe for Spence to go. It's not like he would do all this work and go through all this hell and finally get to the inside where he had any kind of advantage. He either got tied up or, frequently, Crawford just outfought him on the inside. He got to good head position first. He put the uppercuts together. Uppercuts to the body were money for Crawford in the few inside exchanges we had in this fight. And his positioning was so good that, again, even from that close of a range, he was almost always the one to land a good parting shot as they separated. I mean, on the few occasions when it wasn't the referee who separated them, it was Crawford who was hitting on the break successfully.
Yeah, and I think that was one thing. There's another thing that I thought would happen, but not to that extent. Is Spence does? He always has kind of fallen in with this one approach, but he's always had the chance. You know, he gets in, he gets the head and hand position, and then his feet brings his feet in after.
Yeah,
and he just never got that chance. Like Crawford was just like, no, your head's following me now. You know, you've fallen in. You're not getting back. You're not getting back to where you need to be. And like I say, I thought that might happen, but not to that extent. Like, just
I think that was the missing piece, though, right? Like Spence not having a good bridge to cross to get to establish a good position on the inside. Yeah. Like he was already lunging in from too far away, and frequently when he got there, he was at the wrong angle because Bud had already pivoted and like met him on a superior angle. So there was just nothing to. He would fly in, and there was like nothing to land on. Yeah, unless it was a counterpunch.
We saw the limitations of. He's always been kind of straight lined a little bit, Spence, but he's always been able to corral his opponents. And in this fight, we saw, eventually there's going to come. If you're coming straight lined, there's going to be someone who can out circle you. Just a bit of a levels fight, really.
Yeah. How often do you get a levels fight between two top flight fighters, though? Like that, it just underscores how amazing this was. Yeah. Spence is not a bad boxer, Spence is a very good boxer. Crawford made him look
it's like,
terrible.
It's like once every 10 years kind of shit, really.
Yeah.
But the other times I can think of this happening were, 12-round masterclasses. It's Usyk versus Gaethje or Lopendo versus Benair or Roy Jones versus Tony is always the big one. But they were, especially Usyk, Gaethje was a beating, but it wasn't this brutal. It wasn't, you didn't fuck him up this hard.
Yeah, maybe like Mayweather Corrales is a fight that comes to mind often for me. My favorite Mayweather fight.
Yeah.
And even there, I think there was more of an obvious style matchup favorability for Floyd. Maybe that's the benefit of hindsight. But here, man, it just felt so close and so difficult to... I mean, almost everybody picked Crawford, but so difficult to really call exactly how the fight was going to play out and what things Crawford was going to have to come up with answers for. Turns out nothing. He came up with all his answers seemingly either in the first round or before the fight. And then it was Spence playing to his initiative the rest of the time.
Well, there's an interview, I didn't watch it yet, but there's an interview with Bomac, Crawford's trainer, after the fight, explaining that, we knew he was going to do this, and we knew he was going to do this, and we knew he was going to do this, and just explaining everything, which people have been sort of calling him out for, because if there's a rematch, they know what you're working on. But it's like,
Okay.
If they have anything about them as a camp, Spencer's camp, then they will already know what they need to work on, to be honest. So
Yeah.
Although it's a pretty steep mountain to climb with with some like technical adjustments.
Yeah, I would say this. It's probably Spence doesn't have to improve very much to make it a much closer fight. But he has to improve a lot to make it to actually win. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
If he tightens up a couple of margins, and Crawford won't be able to fuck him up like he did. But to actually then turn that into turning it over into something he can work into victory is going to be much harder.
Not just because the gap was so obviously wide, but having to build to a victory already doing a bunch of plainly uncharacteristic things, because we saw a lot of very typical Spence moves, very specifically countered by Crawford in this fight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that is the insane thing about Crawford, is that he doesn't really seem to have super typical things. It's so difficult to think of another fighter across any combat sport, really, that I can think of that has this ability to just ramp up his sense of like initiative and aggression and so on to just exactly what is needed.
Yeah.
At any point, just like, this is how much I need to kill this guy, and it's always to kill this guy. It's not to win.
Yeah.
There's lots of people who are amazing technical control fighters, but it's just like he sizes people up like they are meat on a butcher's block, and these are elite fighters. And then he's like, that is it. That is how much I will do. And he just goes out and he does it without like breaking a sweat.
I think that was the impressive thing.
Without looking like it concerns him at all.
Yeah, that was the impressive thing, is that this sort of revelation that how many times do you hear somebody say about a fighter that like, oh, they didn't do it because they didn't need to do it. And you're always like, okay, well, why don't they just do it? You know, like, why don't they do the best that they can? It appears that Crawford has literally just gotten away with not being this good against other opponents. Again, I think as time goes on, we will see that there were a lot of favorable style matchup things here that weren't fully appreciated. I think that's already seems to be becoming the consensus. And clearly his preparation was on point. But just the knowledge that when he deems it necessary, Crawford can immediately start punishing all the tendencies he's picked up on is quite terrifying for a future opponent.
Yeah. Like, people are talking about Boots Ennis as his next opponent. And I really like Boots. I don't know if you've watched much of him.
I think I've seen
really good,
one
and he's really good in every single phase. So I understand why people are want to see that fight. But he just does stuff, and he isn't always completely aware of what he's doing. And Crawford is just gonna be aware of what he's doing. He's gonna see the mistakes he still makes, because he's like a fighter on the rise. He's gonna fuck him up, and it just isn't. He's not ready for that.
Yeah,
and no one is. I think that's the question everyone's having after the fight, right? Is like who's going to test him? Who's going to challenge Terence Crawford? What's the next interesting fight?
Yeah, it may not be too far off, because frankly, he's going to have to get old.
Yeah,
and he's what, 35?
Yeah.
So but this might be like, who knows? This could end up being the final peak performance for Crawford, and we start to see him slip after this. But if this is a last hurrah before the end of his prime, then like, he absolutely maximized the occasion.
Yeah, but I think it's also worth noting he's fast, but he doesn't rely on his speed. Like, he's not Roy Jones, where once his speed
absolutely.
He had to reteach himself how to box.
No.
So he's probably his fade out is going to be slower than some of the other, really, really remarkable guys.
Yeah,
because he's not as reliant on his speed.
Yeah, more like Floyd. I mean, he is a very positionally aware fighter. He's got all the tools he needs to establish distance and to stay safe. And also, another good thing for fighters to have late in their careers, he has power too. And I don't think a lot of Crawford's power is speed, but I think he has natural power as well.
And he has the strength, like the physical strength to manhandle you, which is also one of the things that goes last, and helpful to deliver power.
Certainly.
As well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know what more we can say. I would just love to blather on about how amazing this was.
Throw down the gauntlet. I'm not suggesting we should talk this out right now. But who's number one, Naoya Inoue or Terence Crawford? It's obviously Terence Crawford, but
yeah, I don't know.
Arguments about this.
Frankly, these are. If we could have both you and Kyle on, we would have either the most intriguing or the most insufferable argument of all time. Because Kyle loves to argue about pound for pound. I kind of dip my toes in that water every now and then, and I immediately regret it every time because I realize I don't care that much about fantasy matchmaking. I can't care to that extent.
Isn't Kyle an Usyk guy?
What's that?
Kyle is an Usyk guy.
Probably. Yeah, that's the most contrarian position. That's probably it.
I mean, I do love Usyk as well.
Everybody loves Usyk, of course. Yeah. But if you're going to pick one of the three...
Today it would be Terence Crawford, let's be fair. But
yeah, if you're going to pick one of the three, it's going to be the one you saw last.
True.
Exactly.
Yeah, true.
So if you'd reversed, if Naoya Inoue had fought today, I mean, okay, Kyle would not put Inoue top because he didn't rate Fulton. Me and him got into a little bit of a...
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it an argument, but he said everyone who gave Fulton a chance was an idiot, and I went, I did. And he went, oh...
Sorry, mate. But, That's how you get Kyle, because he is a good person and his down in the middle of his cold black heart. You make him feel bad for his opinions. That's how you get him.
Yeah, I mean he's gone to bat for me so many times. I can't.
We love Kyle more than anything. He is one of my favorite people in the combat sports world. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have literally nothing meaningful to say about a pound for pound debate. Naoya Inoue is amazing.
No,
Terence Crawford's amazing. They're both generationally great fighters. I mean, I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just great to see them both at the same time, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and Usyk too. I mean, as Phil said at the top, like you just have amazing fighters up and down the sport of boxing right now.
Yeah.
And those aren't even close to all of them, but those are I think three fighters who will probably be remembered among the greats of all time.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
And they're all trying to do shit.
As someone I think said on Twitter, it is at least better than like the MMA version of the debate, where there isn't like a super wrong answer.
Yeah.
Like it won't be like in MMA where people are like, is it Alexander Volkanovski or is it John Jones? And you're like,
it's obviously not John Jones. Yeah, well, if you listen to UFC commentary, it was Kamaru Usman until about 4 months ago.
Yeah. I mean, in MMA, it's always the guy who most recently
absolutely
did anything, and MMA guys just not many of them stay at the top for very long. So it's
yeah.
And also he's been really good for like 2 years. It's incredible.
And also in MMA, you can't be the greatest right now without also being the greatest ever, because MMA is the ultimate it's the ultimate American sport, really, and it's at least as far as like the UFC and a lot of Western international MMA, because it carries with it this sort of optimistic, like manifest destiny idea that things are always getting better. And so therefore you get a million posts from people who were like, GSP wouldn't beat Colby Covington. It's like, I think he might, guys. I mean, MMA as a sport is definitely, I think, progressively getting better across the board, but it's GSP you're talking about.
In the real divisions.
What's that?
It's getting better in the real division.
That's true. Yeah, that light heavyweight, if anything, worse than it was years ago. The guy's going to fight for the title who literally can't grapple. So,
yeah, I don't understand what's happening over there in MMA. In my boxing way, it's like the big guys are good. I mean, the heavyweights aren't. The heavyweights are embarrassing, but apart from Usyk, but the cruiserweights are great. I mean, not right now, but often.
When Usyk was in there, when was climbing through the cruiserweight division, that was an amazing roster of people.
Yeah. Yeah, like, people were getting confused about why Usyk had a really tough fight with Breedis, and it's like, because Breedis is really good, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
But yeah, that happens.
Okay, well, good time to point out that you don't know what's happening in MMA, because we are going to return to UFC 291 after this break to talk about the aforementioned Alex Pereira versus Jan Blachowicz after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. After a long digression between segments, we are finally excited to talk about this light heavyweight fight. I was quite hyped beforehand for Alex Pereira, Jan Blachowicz. I did not really know what to expect. I sort of waffled. I don't even remember what I did on last week's episode of Heavy Hands. On the vivisection, I went ahead and picked Pereira. Phil, you might remember. Did I pick Pereira here as well?
Yep, you did.
Great. So basically, I feel almost by sheer chance I ended up picking the right guy. It did not look like a fight where one fighter was decisively better than the other, despite the fact that Jan Blachowicz gassed completely after one round. I actually thought there was basically one super definitive round and then two quite close rounds. And the super definitive round was really only because, as we pointed out many times, Alex Pereira is bad at grappling. He's one of the best, the most prominent fighters in the sport.
I think round two was also actually quite definitive. Jan was getting really badly beaten up.
Yeah, but it wasn't. It wasn't as one-sided as it might have felt watching it live, because it was really the body language. Jan looked terrible. It really emphasized everything that was happening, and then by round three, you saw him stabilize, and you're like, oh, he's actually not doing that bad. Round two is not. It's not, let's say, as lopsided, I don't think, as round one was, where only one guy had any advantage.
Round one was literally just...
Yes.
Jan just sat on Pereira's back for the entire round, and that was it.
Yeah, that's a definitive round, though, right? Like, there's no question at all who won that round. There's obviously Pereira wins the second. I think he wins the third, too. When he does land, shots are more impactful. But it was really Jan flailing around and gasping for breath that made it look so bad. Go on, Lukasz.
Yeah, speaking as a Polish guy, I'm saying it was a complete robbery. But no, in real life, it was basically Jan. I don't think he was just gassed. I mean, he was obviously gassed, but I think he was also, he'd convinced himself that he can't compete with Pereira on the feet at all. And so he spent round two going, oh no, I can't grapple anymore. What's happening? Yeah. And then he kind of, in round three, he kind of realised that he shouldn't stand there forever, but he can kind of handle himself on the feet. And even though he couldn't, he was too gassed to do anything with it, he looked a bit better.
He should have just done striking with him the whole time. I think he could have kickboxed with Pereira and done pretty well. Yeah. And then just sprinkled in the takedowns as a threat. I think that would have worked.
Yeah. But even, because the takedown he got in the first round, like Pereira's bad on the ground, but he was ready to defend himself, so he didn't have any instant opportunities. And if he'd have been striking into, like in the third round, he kind of realised, okay, if I want to get a takedown, I have to strike with him because I don't have the energy anymore to drive for a takedown straight off. And he immediately just sat on top of him, and then he didn't have time to do anything with it, and was too tired. But if he'd have done that earlier, he might have had a takedown that he wasn't having to fight for every inch of.
Yeah, could have banked 2 rounds and then just survived. Obviously, he could survive. He took some nasty shots from Pereira, and Jan Blachowicz is a durable man.
Yeah. I think if we've learned anything from this fight, it's that actually Jan could have just Blachowicz blitzed.
It worked. God damn it! It worked.
Destroyed him, because some of the exchanges in round 3 were very funny. Yeah, it's like Blachowicz lumbering after him in his most laboured, lumpy, flaily Blachowicz blitzes, he's done like in a hot minute, and then just landing every single one of them. Just like clearly like genuinely buzzing Alex Pereira. And then he sort of did this like 3 times, and it worked every time. And he was like, now he will be ready for me to hit with the takedown because he's going to be worried about my punches. And it was just like, nope, he's still that worried about the takedown. You could just keep punching him in the face.
Just keep punching him.
He's entirely standing upright and just like leaving his hands by his waist to catch underhooks.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting point from you both. This is not the first time this has happened in MMA, where I think the MMA fighter has underrated their own abilities. I think Jan Blachowicz could have competed with Pereira in a kickboxing ring, honestly. Having the thought of a takedown to threaten obviously made it much easier, but he's not a terrible kickboxer. He does some goofy things, but so do big kickboxers.
In fact, I've watched it back. I've been watching it back whilst we've been talking. I'm sorry, Jan Blachowicz wins round 3, and he wins it on the feet. I'm saying it now.
I don't think that's crazy. It's a very close round.
Yeah, I don't care about the takedown. I don't think it's like because he doesn't do anything with it. But
that was one thing which Joe Rogan got right.
Yeah.
What's that? What was that,
He
Lukasz?
lands more shots. He's just like completely knackered and goes staggering off after every time he does it. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was, to be fair, in retrospect, I think it probably was a good thing to go straight after Pereira and try and take him down because he's looked so dreadful on the floor.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't think he looked that much better, but he did look like he's massive. Like, I mean, as you know, we said beforehand, he's still going to come out looking like he's much bigger than Jan Blachowicz because he's bigger than everyone in the world. So, no, there was this. Jan had to roll out of the way of some, house-sized fists and so on. Like he's fighting a God of War boss in order to even get to the takedowns. But that was the main problem with Jan, is that obviously going to a wrestling game. I mean, Jan has always tuckered himself out wrestling with anyone.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Well, he's not. The thing is, Jan is not really a good wrestler. He's an okay grappler.
Mm-hmm.
He's about as good at grappling as, like, Nikita Krylov, who we were correctly reprimanded last week in the comments.
He did annihilate Nikita Krylov in the grappling.
Yeah, well, and they are two fighters, I think, who, like, if one of them gets the advantage early in the grappling, they're going to beat a lot of people in this division. Krylov needs to have like the aggression and people responding to it on the ground, or else he kind of panics. But he's not actually that good of a wrestler, and like it was a massive indictment on Izzy that he got him down the way he did so many times, and also showed the physical disparity more than anything. I think the very first takedown he got on Pereira, he did so much fucking work to make that happen. Like that. Probably more than anything contributed to him gassing, even though he essentially got the rest of the round to rest.
100% did. I mean, and he wasn't really resting either because
he just latched onto his legs and was like, "I'm going to lift him."
Yeah, I mean, but being on someone's back, I think, is actually not that much less tiring than carrying someone. I mean, at least you can carry a heavy weight, as a rucksack kind of thing, if someone is on your back. But having to hold up your weight by wrapping your legs around something is actually, I think, quite tiring.
The other person carrying your weight, that is in fact a good ergonomic design to have most of the weight on your hips. That's like a hiking backpack.
Yeah. But yeah, it does at least partially, it speaks to the probably more accident than design, but the absolute like genocide of wrestlers in the light heavyweight division.
Yeah.
They're all either in Bellator or they've retired like Cormier, or they're off heavyweight like I mean, I guess John Jones, even though
it just raises the question.
It's like an offensive anymore.
It raises the question: what hilarious way would Ryan Bader find to lose to Alex Pereira in a fight that he should so obviously win?
Yeah, 100% he would just panic his way into he would stare fixedly at the exact point he was going to put his head into. He was going to dive for the takedown 3 seconds into the fight, and Alex Pereira would simply notice this. Would notice him looking at it because he would have been doing it for 3 minutes, and then Alex Pereira would simply punch that spot as hard as he could.
It's cheating. You're not supposed to be out there noticing
directly
things.
As Ryan Bader dived into it. Yeah, I mean all those guys like Phil Davis, Ryan Bader, Corey Anderson. You could see all of them finding ways to lose to Pereira.
Yeah.
But also one of them would probably beat him just on the odds of it because he's still not very good at wrestling. But honestly, it doesn't matter.
Most of his takedown defense was being too big to take down easily unless you're actually good at wrestling. And then really his grappling approach, as was the case against Izzy, I think he's pretty much just taken a page out of Derek Lewis's book. He just sort of chills. He's like, all right, I'm a huge puncher. I'll probably make something happen later. Why waste energy freaking out? He just rode out the first round. I mean, I think you're right. More than Jan did. Jan was trying to make something happen. Pereira had the luxury of just essentially ceding the round, which can obviously bite you, especially in a 3-round fight. If you happen to wind up in a position where you're forced to cede another and you really do need a finish, which obviously it would have been hard for him to get here. But, he just preserved his energy for the later rounds by literally doing nothing on the ground. He just kind of based up and waited, and it worked.
All so that he could get absolutely devastated on the feet in the third round by extremely knackered Polish man.
Let's Lukasz, did you I don't know if you share our opinion, which we expressed heartily last week, of Jan Blachowicz being an actually especially good kick fighter for MMA. Were you surprised at all by how much success Alex Pereira had with the calf kicks in this fight?
I'm not sure I was surprised, but I was expecting Blachowicz to defend them more, be more keen on defending them, but also I wasn't surprised by Blachowicz being so scared of Pereira striking that he just didn't do anything until he had an option. It kind of felt like that going in, like Pereira turned himself into this boogeyman on the feet. Or bogeyman, because I'm English.
No, you say it properly.
Yeah, and so I wasn't surprised. I would say I wasn't surprised that he abandoned things he's good at because he was so focused on, I have to get to the ground. Which specific things they were, I wouldn't have been able to tell you before the fight. But yeah, Pereira kind of does that to people. It's like, oh shit, I can't do this thing I'm good at because he's going to be better at it than me.
Yeah.
And then,
I think it is frequent.
I heard Jack Slack talking about this a bit, and he was just saying I think he just thinks Pereira's a really good low kicker now. And I was like, you know what, fair enough.
No, I think he is. He was super successful with them against Izzy in both of their fights, especially the last one.
I think he just said I fully subscribe to this take, is that he's just gotten a lot better at it's like we always say with the massive punchers, is that if you are a massive puncher, you don't need to be a massive puncher.
Yeah.
And the same thing is obviously true of Alex Pereira's low kicks. He doesn't need to put much on them because he's 9 feet tall and 400 pounds. He can just reach out with his leg. So I think there was very little tell on any of the low kicks so even Jan, who is generally a pretty superlative checker, and
Adesanya
not ready for them.
Adesanya said the same thing about Pereira. He was shocked by how difficult they were to read those kicks. That a great many of them he just didn't see them coming until it was too late. Probably that has something to do with the fact that Pereira has the uncanny ability to make people pay attention to his hands.
Yeah, why is that?
But But
I
yeah,
think it's also fair to say Pereira's a smart guy. Like, he's focused on the feet, but he's a smart guy. You can see that. And MMA is really dumb. So when he realised that MMA was freaking out because calf kicks, land, he was kind of okay. I'll learn how to do that and see how it goes. So it's probably not that surprising that he's improved.
Yeah. But I really think I agree. I mean, I think Pereira is a good low kicker, is a better one in MMA than he ever was as a kickboxer. And he wasn't a bad low kicker before, but they weren't as present or focused a part of his game. But I really do think that a lot of how this matchup played out had to do with what Jan Blachowicz thought of Alex Pereira. That at a certain point in round 3, he had been forced into striking mode. He was too tired to do anything else. He literally could not have mustered the energy for another fight for a takedown. He needed a clean connection and getting him off his feet quickly, or it wasn't going to happen. He could barely walk and move around without puffing. All he could do was think about the thing he's actually good at, which is striking. And he started checking the low kicks. So, I think it was his hyper fixation on, I don't want to get punched by this guy, ergo I have to wrestle. That whole thought process that made them particularly effective. Because it's just it's such an MMA fighter thing to do, but it is frequently such a suicidal approach to fighting a specialist to just mentally, before the fight, concede a massive slice. Often your best slice of the fight to your opponent and be like, I'm going to do all the other stuff I can do because he can't do it well. This is like when you give up your jab because you're fighting a southpaw. The jab builds everything else you do, but you're like, well, it doesn't work against southpaw, so I'm going to do something completely different from my comfort zone to win. I don't think that's hardly ever a good way of coming up with a winning game plan, is to sacrifice your own strengths. I think that's what Jan did here.
Yep. And I think the other thing is...
I think that's fair to do if the other person is terrible. If you think that they're genuinely terrible at an area of...
it's a matter of degrees. Knowing that you're going to mix in the threat, that this is going to be your ace up the sleeve, is different from saying, I'm going to win this fight with my wrestling because I have to. It's a slight psychological difference, but the whole, I can't afford to let this happen, means that you are going to freak out when it does happen and you're not going to be ready for it. Jan has to go into a fight like this.
If Randy Couture against James Toney, for example, is the most extreme example.
Of course, right? Yeah, go for a takedown, of course.
He's just going to shoot for the takedown and take him down because it's going to be easy. And I don't actually discredit Jan for being like, I'm just going to sell out on getting this takedown because this guy sucks on the floor.
I get it. It makes sense, but it put it.
I think as we saw, I think it's just a physical thing in that he can't actually maintain it for that long. Pereira has at least learned, as you said, he's learned to at least survive on the floor. Jan just didn't realize that he could utterly crush him on the feet. As he did in the third round.
Lukasz, you were trying to say.
Yeah, I think he also, when he went for that takedown, straight away, he basically persuaded Pereira that he doesn't have to worry about the striking. All Pereira has to do is avoid getting taken down, and he's going to win the striking exchanges. And it wasn't until Blachowicz was too tired to do anything that he started to strike, like you said, and by then it was maybe a little bit too late, even though it was clear daylight robbery. Yeah, it was just a little bit too late. And even if he'd started doing it a little bit earlier, but Pereira was just like, I don't have to worry about the striking here. I don't have to think about this. And that was what the second round was about, really.
Yeah,
just Pereira just kind of like, as long as I stay off the ground, I'm fine here because he isn't going to try to beat me on the feet.
Bit of a two-way street. Probably that made Jan more effective than he would have been otherwise with his striking. But hey, you know what? Who got the better of the left hook exchanges in this fight? It wasn't Mr. Left Hook Alex Pereira. I'll tell you that. Jan Blachowicz landed that left hook like a half a dozen times, clean.
It's a Polish power.
That's right.
I do love that they bill Jan Blachowicz as being essentially the same kind of fighter as Alex Pereira. That always tickles me. Polish power, massive puncher. It's like,
he's not bad.
No, he hits plenty hard, but to me, it's never been the defining characteristic of the way Jan Blachowicz fights. They bill him like he's some slugger. And it's like, yeah, he's actually like a patient, kind of awkward, long-range fencer, counterboxer kind of guy with good kicks. Anyway, Alex Pereira is going to be the champion while being as good as Derek Lewis on the ground and in the wrestling. Love it.
But he's still a great kickboxer, as you said. He's at sort of his best as a kickboxer now. And yeah, unless Magomed Ankalaev stops sulking and starts fighting again, it seems hard to imagine that there's anyone who's going to test him harder than Jan did.
Yeah, even then, I would not put it past Ankalaev to find a way to lose to Pereira.
Yeah.
He really should win, but I would not put it past him finding a way to spend too much time striking or be way too obvious in a Ryan Bader fashion with the desire to grapple or something. Who knows? But I just don't trust that man against dangerous opponents. I just don't. All right. Anything else you guys want to mention on this card before we head out of here?
I was going to say Bobby Green versus Tony Ferguson was just a real example of like Tony Ferguson being someone who has reached heights in his career that Bobby Green will never reach.
Yeah.
But it just being an incredible example of here's a super weird style which can age well.
Yeah.
Here's a super weird style which really, really can't.
Yeah. Bobby Green's weird style is built on like principles and a fundamental understanding of how fighting works. And Tony Ferguson's weird style is built entirely on being unkillable and fearless and incredibly tireless and aggressive.
And just doing stuff that he thinks is cool. And you can... So much of it was built around kind of... not just the physicality, but I think also the instincts.
Yeah.
Just the confidence that he knew when to go for things. And that's another thing which sort of principles mean you can avoid to some extent.
Yeah.
You start getting unsure about what you're doing later on in your career. At least you have basically a textbook of sorts to tell you what it is. This was just once again, a depressing meeting with like a single, as in the Gaethje fight, like a single Pyrrhic, and the Chandler fight for that matter, a single Pyrrhic moment where people can just be like, why can't he do that all the time?
Yeah. Because the whole thing was not built to weather. It was not built to last. Yeah,
it was just a please retire moment, but he's been doing that for years.
That's about the fifth please retire moment in his career. So
yeah. It's getting into as a boxing fan. Roy Jones was my favourite fighter ever, and then he spent about 12 years going, just stop. And I'm really worried that we're going to see that from Tony Ferguson. Like in 10 years' time, we're still just going to be going, Tony, go home.
Yeah,
go home.
And even Roy, I mean, at least like Roy would just like get knocked out.
Yeah.
There weren't as many fights where he was just getting like thrashed the entire time because he was in there like trying to adapt to having gotten old. Tony is like he's just trying to be Tony still. He just can't let it go, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, the sort of takedown to Imanari roll that sort of ended the fight. Brutal.
Yeah. Oh my God. And the thing is, the UFC will absolutely let him go on for as long as they think they can get,
Of course.
The one viewer out of it that will be like, yeah, just keep killing yourself.
Of course. I mean, the other major story coming out of this card is them having refused to pay Stephen Thompson, who's already invested probably tens of thousands of dollars in a training camp, for showing up, because you are technically allowed to turn down a fight if your opponent misses weight, but not actually.
you are going to get penalized for that.
And as someone pointed out, I think he was the only guy who turned up in the actual UFC gear.
Yeah, and all the awful Rock shoes and the Reebok bullshit. And is it still Reebok? They have a different one now. I can't even. Is it Adidas now or
Venom,
something?
It's the Rock thing.
It's the Rock thing. That's the new one.
Okay.
Oh god.
Venom is the clothes they wear, and then the Rock pays for their shoes, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. There's been a bit of controversy on online this week because the Rock's been paying for the striking actors, and then just going out to the UFC and going, "Yeah, wearing my shoes. They're really brave." And everyone's like, "Give them some money too, you bastard."
Yeah, when you say the Rock pays for their shoes, Phil, you do not mean that the Rock pays them to wear his shoes, because that is definitely not happening.
No. What?
That
I
is
would never do that.
He would never do that. He's a good man. Haven't you seen him in all his?
I would never say that. I would.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is more than enough, I think, for this week's episode. We saw again. I just hate when I see something really awesome and I'm disappointed. With Gaethje Poirier, it's through no fault of the fighters. Like, it was awesome. I really want to see more. And then we had Terence Crawford, Errol Spence, and I saw absolutely everything I wanted to see and had all my expectations subverted or surpassed. And a lot of other weird, interesting stuff. The full gamut of emotions for this UFC card, combined with a once-in-a-generation performance in the boxing ring. A really good weekend for combat sports. And coming up next week, we have Corey Sandhagen, Rob Font. So the fun is not over yet. In fact, it is not a terrible card, I think, because, that's right, it's taking place in front of a crowd. So thank goodness
You're not talking about Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz?
Ooh, I would love to. I really would. But, no, fuck that.
Yeah.
Thank you once again to Lukasz for joining us today. The Twitter handle, I believe, is Crafty Boxing.
That's it.
At Crafty Boxing on Twitter. Phil, of course, is at Evil Greg Jackson. I'm at Boxing Bush. And, we will join you next week for that Sandhagen Font card. Should be a good time. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of Face Punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.